Kids, good morning. Today I want to talk about my voting experience here in Florida, my early voting experience. Florida is currently in early voting from Saturday, this last Saturday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. till this next Saturday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every single day. There's early voting in every county in Florida, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Now, I live in Citrus County, Florida. It's a very rural, very small, extremely mostly white, mostly heavily Republican county. I've lived here since 2005. I have never, ever waited more than 4 minutes to vote in Citrus County, ever, on any election at any time, anywhere. Early voting or voting on the day of. Now, this last Saturday, from what I understood, early voting started with long lines of up to 2.5 hours. And for most of the day, the lines were over an hour and a half. For example, I was there about 1 o'clock, and the line was about an hour and a half long. And it was vacillating between an hour and 20 minutes and an hour and 45 minutes. Because when I left, the line was longer than when I had arrived. So it looked like it was about up to an hour and 45 minutes. Clearly, our elections officials have cut back on budgets because there was 5 computers available for volunteers to check people in, and only 3 of them were manned. They had plenty of places to take your ballot, either stand up or sit down and do your actual voting, which of course was a nightmare also because it was 8 pages of stuff to vote on, and some of it very misleading as to what it was unless you really studied up on it. And sadly, what I saw in line made me even more horrified. So here's what my experience was like voting in a rural Republican white Citrus County. There was a lot of older people with the newspaper, and our newspaper is very conservative up in our area. And it took stands or tried to explain in simple words what these initiatives or these changes to the Constitution were all about. People were solely getting their information based on that only. And that was a very slanted view as far as I was concerned. And that concerned me, but it was at least some people were at least trying to read up on what was going on. Now, you always have to be very suspicious when any state legislature that's controlled by one party in both houses is trying to amend the Constitution. And especially that many times in one session, 11 times. Absolutely ridiculous. The other thing I noticed was this. Now, this is something I noticed when I first moved to Citrus County. And full disclosure, I grew up in Southern California, which is a very diverse place. And then I lived in Las Vegas, Nevada, which was a very diverse place. And then I lived in South Florida, which is a very diverse place. Citrus County, Florida is not a diverse place. There is very little diversity here at all. And they have a tendency or a penchant to sometimes out loud in public talk like they're back in the 1940s. And I'm not joking here. As I sat in line, or stood in line at this polling place, some people were actually out loud making nigger jokes while discussing the election. Using the N-word, using the word nigger. They were making nigger jokes. There's no nice way to put that. And there was a black man in line at one point while they were doing this, towards the back, at the end of the nigger joke period. Also, there was an elderly black woman inside voting who may or may not have been able to hear, but as she walked out, everybody looked at her like she was a monkey that had escaped from the zoo with such contempt, and my heart really broke for her. It was rather disgusting, I must say. And the idea that I have friends online who jump up and down and claim that there's no racists in the Republican Party, that that's just a bunch of stuff made up by the media, is absurd. Not only does it happen in my county every single day, but as a former truck driver that drove 48 states in Canada, I've stopped in every state hundreds of times at truck stops, and you get to meet the real America at truck stops. It's America on the move. You get to see the locals, you get to see the people passing through, you get to hear their conversations at the dinner tables, etc. So I know what real America thinks, because I've seen real America. I've spent a lot of time with real America. So these people that get online and pretend it's just all made up by the media, it's not. Now, the other troubling thing I saw happening, at least in my county, at least at my polling station, was this. There was a lady standing at the door, and her job was to monitor the voting machine and also answer questions for the people standing in line coming in before they started to vote. And then put little stickers or hand little stickers to people that like this that said, I voted, okay, on the way out the door, after they put their thing in the machine. And people were asking questions, lots of them, like, how do you put it in the machine, or is it going to be safe, or etc., etc. Meanwhile, the machine has a fault. It's a paper ballot, and you mark it with a black marker. And then it goes into a machine to be counted. And it's both sides. And there's 2 pages, so it's a total of 8. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 pages long, this ballot. It's ridiculous. So if you fail or you don't want to answer a question, the machine automatically, it takes it all the way in and then rejects it out. And without knowing and no one explaining this to you, I saw somebody put it in, it came back out, he put it in again, it came back out, so he figured he'd voted. So he folded it in half and walked out. But the fact was, he hadn't voted, because since he left something blank, the machine rejected it and required that woman to do an override to say, yes, intentionally, this voter is leaving something blank. And 2 people walked out with their ballots folded in half, and I pointed it out to her. I said, those people are walking away with their ballots. They're not going to count, are they? She said, oh my God, thank you for telling me that. And she ran down the hall and got them and retrieved them. But my question was, I wonder how many other people had voted and thought that it was done because they got their ballot back and it had already gone into the machine, and folded in half and left with it, and didn't get their vote counted. It was very disturbing to me. Very disturbing. The other thing that was very disturbing was to see how many people would show up and see the line and stand there for 3 or 4 minutes and then just get frustrated and walk away. And you never know if they're going to come back or not. Or some people that stood in line 45 minutes and could not take it any longer for health reasons or whatever, and just had to give up and walk out of line. So it makes you wonder how successful early voting was in my county on that day, and how many people might have got discouraged and not come back, and also how many people walked out with their partial ballot in their hand because they didn't want to fill out something they didn't understand, and somebody failed to catch it before they left out the door. There's something fundamentally wrong with Florida. There's something fundamentally wrong with the way we vote. There's no need in such a small rural county to have such long lines. Now, I understand later that evening, lines got very short like they normally are in Citrus County. But they should have been expecting the onslaught and been manned and prepared for it. And they should also be monitoring the machines much more carefully, so people aren't walking away with their ballots in their hands thinking they've already voted when they didn't, because it wasn't ever counted. And because maybe only one ballot went through and they filled out one sheet, but they didn't fill out the whole entirety of the second sheet, perhaps both get voided. Who knows? Nobody knows the rules. I asked the question and they couldn't tell me. because once they pull off the tab, they have to count the number of ballots. They're numerically matched in case of a recount. So what happens if you only get one of the two pieces of paper? Does that both get voided or just the one? It's interesting. It's frightening. And it's troublesome. So when you're voting, be very careful. Ask a lot of questions. Don't leave with your ballot in your hand thinking that you're okay. Because if they don't have your ballot, they don't have your ballot. There's nothing to compare it to in case there's a recount. And as close as this election as should be, there's probably going to be some recounts. Just saying. Anyway, thanks for listening today. And I hope that your voting experience is much more positive than mine was. Have a good day.